And at Kent State in Ohio, 4 students are killed.
The turmoil of the 60s connects LSD to radicals and other subversives. Soon, groups associated with LSD and the drug itself become demonized, a prerequisite for the criminalization of drugs throughout history.
The mob's mood, unruly.
The next step in LSD's transformation into an illegal drug is the election of Richard Nixon, America's law and order president.
President Richard Nixon saw a political opportunity to attack the counterculture kids whose signature was often smoking marijuana and doing drugs. And these people were really putting a lot of pressure on Nixon and the war, and the country was divided.
An American flag is burned at the height of the demonstration.
Politically, Nixon needs to quiet the voices of protest that are rocking the nation. Speaking out against the government is legal. Public demonstrations are legal. Recreational drug use is not. Meanwhile, the nation's top cop, FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover, sends an official memo stating, since the use of marijuana and other narcotics is widespread among members of the New Left, you should be alert to opportunities to have them arrested by local authorities on drug charges. In a time of grave social upheaval, the president declares a war on drugs.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number 1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Nixon begins by throwing out the old system of taxing drugs out of existence, making them unattainable to most users.
Prior to that, a drug was illegal when you passed a specific law against it, like the Marijuana Tax Act, the Harrison Act, national prohibition. But the 1970 Comprehensive Drug Abuse Act introduced scheduling.
Scheduling categorizes drugs by their perceived danger versus their proven or perceived medical benefits.
Schedule I drugs are drugs that are thought to have no legitimate medical value and therefore are absolutely prohibited except in rare cases of research. Schedule I, they put heroin and, strangely enough, marijuana, LSD, number of other drugs.
LSD fills a generation's prescription for social change. That relationship will also affect how all drugs from that point on are made illegal.
You can move a drug from one schedule to another. You see how much easier that is than having to pass a new law every time you change your mind about something.
I can well understand that legislators would want to include LSD in the class of narcotics, basically, saying that it should be made illegal in the same way that addictive drugs such as heroin and other drugs would be illegal. Actually, it's not the same kind of drug, but it was producing a similar destructive social effect.
Years later, ecstasy is put on Schedule I, limiting any potential research on the drug. The drugs of a rebellious generation are now under federal jurisdiction, just like deadly narcotics. With the Controlled Substance Act, Congress will never have to pass a law to ban a drug again.
The president's plan begins to make progress toward reality. Drug arrests are doubled. 3 times as much heroin is seized.
Nixon's war on drugs removes regulation from the democratic process. That task is now up to the Food and Drug Administration. Meanwhile, Nixon creates the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA, whose yearly budget increases over 30 years to nearly $18 billion. With that money, the DEA wages what has become the longest war in American history, a war that has yet to be won.
This is one area where we cannot have budget cuts.
The war goes beyond law enforcement. Treatment programs, banned under the first drug laws of the century, are reinstated.
acid, baby, the stuff dreams are made of.
LSD, like its predecessors, goes underground.
What happened was it lost its public image, so that you didn't see it in the newspapers. It didn't light up the television screens. So the dramatic change had to do with the public attention, much more so than the levels of use. It's never gone away. It's been a mainstay of the youth drug scene since the late 1960s, and it is today.
Illegal drugs have been likened to weeds. They're never completely eradicated. At the start of a new century, new drugs appear, never before seen, that pose yet another threat to a generation of kids on the brink of adulthood.
Above your head! Put your hands on top of your head.
Nixon's plan to stamp out illegal drugs initiates a prohibition based on the belief that no one has a right to take a drug proven or perceived to be dangerous.
You'll not be hurt, just cooperate, okay?
The constitutional right to pursue chemical happiness, in place a century before, has vanished.
I'm going to search you. Carrying any weapons? No, sir. Okay.
Yet what the government does to protect its own citizens is often criticized.
Spread your legs out a little.
If you sum it up and you look at the drug war, number one, it hasn't reduced the production of drugs in the source countries. Number two, even if it did, the synthetic drugs that are made here are just as dangerous. We would still have a similar drug problem. Number three, 90% of the drugs come into the country undetected because of the vast trade that we have. And it hasn't stopped drug use and drug selling.
It has been a disaster even worse than alcohol prohibition. What it's done to the criminal justice system is indescribable. Half the people, more than half the people in federal prison are there for drug offenses.
Where's he gonna go?
We're arresting 500,000 people a year for possessing marijuana. We're locking up kids, sometimes for life, for their first drug offense. We have no room in our prisons for rapists and child molesters and murderers because we're filling them up with these nonviolent drug offenders.
While the war against drugs is a burden and expense that some critics question, everyone agrees something must be done.
But first of all, the supplemental that we're considering today is about our children and whether we want our children to grow up in a society free from the scourge of drugs.
Meanwhile, for a new generation of sophisticated national and international drug traffickers, it's business as usual. They make untold billions selling drugs, which tempt adolescents and adults every day, despite the best efforts of law enforcement to stop them.
This is solely a way of making money and looking at the young people in the United States as the guinea pigs to make the money from. These organizations are committed to bring drugs in the country, and we have to be just as committed, not only in law enforcement, but as a society. You know, we're working with parents, we're working with teachers, working with educators to get that message out. The drugs are bad.
To make matters worse, some of the new synthetic drugs are potentially more dangerous than their predecessors. In light of this danger, many have been added to the schedules of federally controlled substances. Among them, ketamine, or Special K, a powerful veterinary tranquilizer, and gamma-hydroxybutyrate, or GHB. GHB, a workout tonic used by bodybuilders, finds its way into clubs as a dangerous pastime. It's easy to make, and for law enforcement, hard to detect. It looks like water and is sold in containers that disguise its danger.
The primary ingredients are paint stripper, floor stripper, degreasing solvents. My reaction to it was, my God, this is the most dangerous drug I've encountered in 25 years as a cop. And I say that with all my heart.